I have a term that I love. It's called multi-level marketing Christianity. All of us have had the friend on Facebook that suddenly reaches back out over years. Hey, how you doing? I'd love to grab coffee or something. And then you're like, hey, this is great. I haven't seen him in a long time. I always had great conversation with him or whatever. And then you get to there trying to sell you a house, trying to sell you, join the whatever. And it's suddenly, it feels so icky because you go, man, I thought someone cared. And then you found out they had an agenda, and it wasn't that they cared. Their agenda was their agenda on how I could be a part of their thing.
By the way, Matt, I've been meaning to get with you and talk to you about this incredible opportunity that just came my way.
I'm looking forward to that.
Welcome to the PR Church Podcast. We have a very great episode, I think, for you today. And it is really a discussion on discussion. Really, something I've been noticing that's bothered me a lot recently is the rhetoric, especially online, but even in personal relationships with other people, in regards to politics or faith or morality and the kind of connection point between those three. I've noticed that there's a lot of very violent rhetoric. And it's honestly very disturbing to someone like me, even across, Christian denominations, among believers. It's really concerned me a lot. We've got many of the American left believe that the right, which 50% of the country is left, 50% of the country is right. Or so many American left believe that the right in America is 1930s Germany-level Nazis who want to put the LGBTQ community in concentration camps and take away all of women's rights. And what's crazy is I wish I could say that statement is something that people didn't believe, that 50% of the country wanted to do that, but it is something that people believe. Same thing as many believe that the American many people believe that the American left are domestic terrorists trying to corrupt their children's mind with propaganda and inject their bodies with poison. And, I think that anyone who is on either side of that aisle who's listening to this conversation right now is probably like, well, of course I don't believe that. That's not stuff I want to do. I don't want to do that to people. But the reality is that we're at a place where we believe those things about each other on a massive scale. And I used to think, oh no, it's just a few people. But the more and more I'm seeing online, I'm seeing friends of mine who have good friends on the opposite side of the aisle who literally believe the worst in their friends, who corrupt friendships over it. And that just bothers me because we've gotten to a point where we can't have those conversations. It's really tough. And I think really a big role in this. Now, I do think that some of the news media and kind of how it's kind of turned people against each other and things like that, I think that does have some things to do with it. But I think the largest piece in this puzzle is that we don't know how to talk to each other. We don't know how to sit at the table with someone in a completely different viewpoint than us or from a completely different background than us and have a conversation to discuss these topics and to debate these topics. We've gotten to where those topics are taboo. We don't talk about our faith. We don't talk about politics. We don't talk about moral issues. And man, we've gotten to ourselves in a very rough place in the country right now. I think everyone feels it, whether they express it or not. And so something that I kind of want to talk to you guys about, and thank you guys for being on the podcast today. Something that I want to talk to you guys about this is, why don't we know how to talk to each other? Like, why have we gotten to this place culturally where we can't have those conversations?
I think one thing, just as you were sharing, Zach, thanks first off for bringing up this idea of this discussion, just because I think it is important. And I know it's something that I'm glad Bob was able to join us on here because this is an area I've seen myself grow a lot in, but I just go, man, I feel like I've got a long ways to go, is to try and engage people without being triggered, which sometimes feels impossible. We know we use this word in our culture, I'm triggered, and it's really just like this reaction. If I hit Bob, there's going to be some sort of reaction. I think that's sort of where we've become as a people, is that we have been hit so much, or there's been a modeling that's when someone hits you, that's what you need to, you got to react, you got to respond, you got to have your point. And I mean, a lot of the cable news stuff that, or podcast type of things, or influencers online for these different topics you mentioned, many times to get views, it's got a lot of rhetoric. It's got a lot of confrontation. And that's the stuff that sells and people click on and are attracted to. And I think that's when that's constantly modeled. I think just my first thought is when that stuff's modeled to us constantly, how can we expect to not have a reaction if that's what I'm told is the way to do it? And I think also because we're taking the narrative from everyone, right? That validates our point or position, or we think that does, but we've never probably given it much thought, is that suddenly we don't have any depth. So when the person asks a question or engages us or challenges us on that, we can become defensive because I maybe can't defend those positions that I have because somebody told me to have those. My first initial thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah, Zach, I mean, thanks for the invitation to be part of the conversation today. I mean, I'm honored to sit here with you too. I always love talking to you guys, love your insights and, the input that you have to offer. It's incredible. So really appreciate the opportunity to be part of the conversation today. And I agree with so much of what Matt just offered. It's really challenging. It's challenging to navigate our relationships these days, given the topics that are on people's minds, and oftentimes not staying on their minds, but kind of coming out of their mouth. Mm-hmm. And not just strangers. I mean, these are oftentimes family members, close friends, colleagues, people we've worked with maybe for years. And it can be very, very challenging and very difficult to navigate those conversations. And so I think the more we can do to address that and real honestly and candidly share where we struggle, where are our challenges, what are we learning, how have we learned, sometimes even painfully so, to have those kinds of hard conversations, but preserve the relationship nearly at all cost. I think it's really important. I think it's part of our role as pastors. It's part of the training and equipping that I think Paul had in mind when he talks about that in Ephesians. It's some of the stuff that we just need to help each other with. So it's an important topic today.
Yeah. I really liked what you said about preserving the relationship at all costs, because I think that is something that is very countercultural right now. Especially I remember, I feel like this really started to kind of go downhill during 2020, when we started to realize how divided we were, and then we started pushing away. I lost a lot of friends during that time for beliefs held, for whatever. And what I've realized is our relationships are incredibly important. I think right now you go and you can go pull up, I don't know how many news articles about how lonely everyone feels right now. And I wonder how much of that is because we've put our, maybe our political identity or whatever other identities that we've put above our relationships with other people. And I know that in our faith, relationship is very important. I mean, throughout the New Testament, I'm sure you could probably get a big percentage, a big chunk of the New Testament of Paul's letters are about him stressing the importance of relationship. So I was curious if you guys could kind of talk to us about why is it that relationship should be that important?
Well, I mean, I think the kingdom is all about God's relationship with us and our relationship with him and our relationship with other people. Jesus' own ministry and his teachings model that throughout the New Testament. Over and over and over again, we see how much of a priority people are to Jesus. And I think it's absolutely essential. The Bible says there's only two things that will last forever: his word and people. And so I think it's important for us to put people ahead of our point. Oftentimes, I think, in the church particularly, we're kind of known as people who have a point to prove, a point to make. And I don't know if that's served us very well. I do agree that there are times when it's necessary for a point to be heard and a point to be made, to be well articulated and to even be passionately spoken to. I understand that. But I think probably the majority of the time we put our point ahead of the person. And we probably could do well to adjust that and make sure that, you know, the person that we're talking to is more important than any point that we really hope to try to get across. There may be an opportunity downstream for a point to be considered, a point to be made, a point to be discussed. But let's focus on the relationships first.
I think, and especially just as you mentioned, as us as a church, you know, Christ, we see some of his strongest words were for some of the people that were in the church and some of the religious leaders, and yet the people that were very contrary to what we would say living the life that a Christian would want or a person of faith would want. Those were some of the people that he engaged with the most at, you know, this level of like, hey, to the point where he was accused of, you know, hanging out with sinners, right? And I see that a lot of times in my own life, I'll put myself there, I have become isolated in my bubble of people of faith. And I end up with less and less people that have, not for any intention, but less and less people that disagree with me. Mm-hmm. And that's for a number of circumstances. But suddenly I go, wait a minute, Jesus actually pursued relationship with these people. And I don't know how much actively, as I try and evaluate my life, I've pursued relationship. Because sometimes I think my excuse is, well, I've had a hard enough time keeping the relationships I've got. I don't have time for this. But yet, if I really cared about the world and broken people and hurting people, then wouldn't I want to be a part of their lives to try and engage with them and be caring for them?
Yeah, but I mean, that can be difficult too, Matt. I mean, it can be messy, uncomfortable at times, challenging. So it's honestly, I think for a lot of us, it is just easier to hang out with people who are like-minded. And then we don't have to worry about the hassle. You know, we don't have to worry about the tension and all that kind of stuff.
Tension, that's a good word.
Yeah, I remember several years ago, now it's probably been 8 to 10 years ago, I received a letter in the mail, and it was from a mosque that was about 2 blocks away from my church. And they were asking in the letter to have permission to rent parking spaces on Friday, which is their prayer day, because they didn't have enough parking in the mosque, and they were getting in trouble with the city for allowing people to park along the streets, and the neighbors were complaining. And so I reached out to a friend of mine. I didn't even know these people existed. I reached out to a friend of mine and said to a young leader in our church who had been doing a lot of work among the Palestinian people and done a lot of work with Muslims. I said, hey, do you even know these people? And he said, yeah, I mean, they're the largest mosque in the Southwest at that time. They were. And so I said, well, do you know him? Yes. I said, well, would you set up a meeting with them? I'd like to speak to them. So he set up this meeting. We went into the mosque and sat. There were 6 or 8 of their leaders, including the imam. And we walked in. They all stood up and graciously and very respectfully, you know, greeted us. And we sat down together. And I held up the letter and I said, you know, I'm here to address this letter. This letter you're asking to rent parking spaces in our church so that your people can come and pray. And I said, you know, I just can't find myself doing that. And they kind of looked at me and I said, well, you can park in our church parking lot anytime you want, but you're not going to pay for those spaces. We're not going to have you pay rent for that. And it started this, my reaching out toward them and being receptive. I think it just helped provide a pathway for a relationship. And through that conversation, a little bit later on in the conversation, as we sat together, you know, I asked them if they were concerned about some things that were going on in the neighborhood that we shared. We shared the same neighborhood. And are there things going on like kids going to bed tonight feeling the pangs of hunger in your belly? You know, I had those numbers. the numbers of poverty and unemployment and addiction and mental health issues and these kinds of things. Do those things bother you? And of course, they agreed those things were troubling to them to an equal degree that they were troubling to me. And so what I was trying to do was find some common ground, Zach, to where, we could have a conversation, because we could sit there all day long and argue points of doctrine or theology or morality. We could, tumble through all those kinds of things and probably get nowhere. But to try to find a point of agreement, I think is helpful in our relationships with one another. And that's not easy to do. But some of those men in that circle became actually good friends of mine. We would have dinners together on a regular basis. Our families got together several different times. And my life honestly was enriched by people who were very different from me in so many ways.
Yeah. And what would you say, because I hear this a lot, and I think a lot of us feel it as we're trying to do that. Maybe let's say someone is trying to do that, and they go and they say, well, I talk to the people on the other side, and it's just I get angry, or I don't understand how they do it, and they want me to compromise my beliefs to get to that spot, or for me to find that common ground, I have to compromise my beliefs.
Yeah, I might jump in with this too, and not to be argumentative at all, but I think it's a point of clarification.
Yeah.
I think there's a difference in talking to someone and talking with someone.
Yeah. Right.
And so I think when we fall into that normal pattern of I'm talking to you, I've got something I want you to hear. I'm here because I got a point to make, a point to prove. I want you to hear something, rather than talking with someone suggests really probably asking more questions than making more points. Because really what I'm wanting to understand, I like to say it this way: story before stance. I want to hear your story before I make assumptions about your position or your stance. And I want to find points of identification, if I can, with your story. And even if I can't find specific points of identification, I do better by understanding your story. And there are points within a person's story where we can actually be a voice of encouragement. We can be perhaps a person of healing, a person that is there to maybe edify them as we understand their story more. But I think we get really polarized around the stance.
Yeah. We had the other day, a few years ago, one of our volunteers came to me. I was in the tech booth, and he goes, there's a gal out here in the lobby, and I'm trying to, it's gal, kind of, you can tell he's an older gentleman. He goes, it's trying to figure out their sort of this gender thing, and like he's kind of struggling for words. I said, yeah, let me go out and I'll talk to her. And it was this gal. I started engaging in conversation with her, and she was already triggered, already prepared for a defense of her agenda, defense of her position, to come really, and she's got a point to prove. And I'm going to be the one that's going to, she's going to argue with, or someone here at the church. And if I remember right, it was like her grandma or something she'd come with. And I just started asking her questions, just started engaging with her in conversation. And what she was looking at is there was some issue with her and her boyfriend. She's wanting to kind of change some gender identity stuff and do some things down that road to change from a presenting female to more of a presenting male. And her boyfriend didn't like that. And some other people had disagreed with that. And in the part of this conversation, we actually ended up, as I just listened to her, asked questions, engaged with her, I began to find out a lot of really painful things that this gal had been through. Mm-hmm. Some challenges with some abuse, some challenges with some a lot of rejection, family upbringing. And as I began to talk with her and just hear her story, I think that's always what's great, that you always refer back to, Bob, is hearing someone's story. As I began to hear her story, I began to build a relationship with her. I also then shared some things out of my life that I had been through, some things that had happened to me that maybe I actually am more relatable to her position than she thought I was in the beginning. And as we did that, we built a common ground to be able to have conversation from. And then I was able to just share some things like, not to talk to her, but to just ask her some questions. I go, man, it seems like some of these choices you're making, this is some pretty life altering stuff. What have you thought about that? I mean, this is, these are things that are changing your life for forever. These are some heavy topics, and I was able to just engage with her at a deeper level. She's looking for just her life to be fixed, and she's watching stuff online, whether it was TikTok or Instagram, or a bunch of people telling her that, like, this is how your life is going to be better. This is what's going to fix these problems within your soul. The things you're struggling with, this is going to be the answer. Man, isn't that what we all want? If somebody tells us this is the cure for the whatever, we go, well, I'm going to take that. And that's all she was doing. And in the process of doing so, she'd been led down a road. And by being able to have a conversation with her, I was able to not fight or prove a position, but just ask her to think through some stuff. And I think there's been moments like that. One time when I was engaging with a guy up in Alaska, and discovered he was a Moonie, and he was running a faith center for people to have healed marriages and young people that were struggling with their lives. And him and I got to talk, and instead of trying to prove something to him, I got to hear the things he's doing. And I'm going, why should I criticize? Again, don't hear what I'm not saying, as you say. But I go, wait a minute. Isn't it amazing? This guy's essentially not making any money, dedicating his life to make sure marriages are healthier and young people's lives are better in regards to the faith that he follows. And he's giving up of himself to do that. That's actually something I respect. Mm-hmm. I may not agree with his positions.
Right.
And we got to pray together, and the guy got emotional. And I wondered after I left, I go, how many Christians have actually just confronted him as, you're a bad person, you're leading people astray, you're a cult. Conversations about abortion I've had with people, and oh, wait a minute, you care deeply for this girl. You care. That's why you say this matters. And then being able to just, again, I care deeply for that girl also.
Something that we've kind of touched on that I really think is important is, one, I think in our culture, we tend to view that having a conversation with someone or being friends with them means that we support or agree with them.
Yeah.
By having a conversation with someone, I'm supporting them. Or by hanging out with someone, I'm supporting them. And I think that's gotten kind of like what you were saying, was we don't want to have those conversations because, for me to go over there, I'm supporting what they believe in. One thing that I remember, so I did this, I spent a couple weeks working with Dream Center and things like that in Los Angeles. Going out, handing out hygiene bags to people, in West Hollywood too. The biggest thing that we were trying to do was, as we were talking to people on the streets, we were riding the subways, talking to people on the streets, whatever. And as we were doing that, the biggest thing was all we were doing was walking up, asking people if we could pray for them. And if they asked why, our response was, well, we're here to love on our community here in Los Angeles. That's why we're here. And that's something that was not just something that we said, but something that I really cared deeply about in my heart. And I remember, for anyone who has not been to West Hollywood is a primarily LGBTQ plus community, kind of similar to in Phoenix, how if you go down to kind of Melrose Curve area. I remember that we would have conversations that, hey, can I pray for you? And a lot of them would immediately expect us to talk to them harshly, rudely, and so they were very standoffish. And we'd say, like, hey, I just want to pray. Like, is there something I can pray for you for? Because we're out here just trying to love people. And they said, that's it? It's like, yeah, that's all we're here to do. And so we would pray with them. They'd tell us about things that were going on in our lives. And I say, okay, well, can I pray for it? Because I believe that God cares about that, what's going on in your life. And so we'd pray for them. And it doesn't always mean that I would agree that whatever lifestyle they may be living or choices they may be making are right or biblically supported. But what it was our opportunity to say, God's going to sort that out. But what we can do is talk heart to heart, and I can talk to their heart. And to me, it was very powerful. I remember I actually wept later that day, because what I realized was I came into that, and it was one of the first times. I was 18 at the time. It was one of the first times that I realized I had come without a mission to prove that I was right, but just a mission to listen, to pray for. And that's something that stuck with me.
Yeah.
It does not mean that I necessarily agreed with every person I talked to, but it does mean that I cared for them.
I think that's an important distinction to make too, Zach. I like to think of it this way, and I've said it frequently in conversations or teachings that I've done. It's the idea of saying yes before we say no.
Yeah.
And that kind of language oftentimes frightens people. They'll kind of dig in with their heels right away and go, what do you mean, And then I came up with a way to kind of explain that a little further, simply by saying, say yes before you say no. Yes is not a position of agreement necessarily. It's a posture of receptivity, of openness. So if I start with no in my initial interaction with you, if I start with no, I'm never going to get to a yes. I'm never going to get to a place of receptivity. If I start with yes, which is openness and receptivity, I may have to get, sometimes a no is necessary when it comes to an issue. We may get to that place of, disagreement, and that's understandable. But to start in the conversation, or to start in the relationship, Matt, as you gave those great illustrations a minute ago, to start with that initial receptivity, which is, I'd like to know something about you. You just mentioned this point or this position that you have on whatever. Can you tell me about that? I really am interested to know where that comes from. How did that formulate in your life? I'll guarantee you, most people have never been asked that kind of question.
Yeah.
What happens out of the gate, particularly with us Christians, is we want to argue. It's like, boom, right away when we hear a position coming from somebody, whether a family member, friend, colleague, stranger, whatever, our initial reaction is to want to respond with a different kind of point, and so we're right out of the gate, we're gonna fight, rather than, that's interesting. I mean, I've heard that position before, but would you mind just where does that come from within you? What's your story?
I think also we all have our own biases and our own filters that we filter the world through. And part of that is just, God's given us the ability to understand the world in many ways. And that is a useful tool many times, is to be able to understand things quickly. It's not useful many times when we've used it as a form of judgment or rejection, where we have preconceived notions as to someone, why they're doing what they're doing, or why they have the beliefs they have. And so we've already built our argument. Mm-hmm. We've already built our narrative of why we can, one, convince them to stop doing what they're doing. Well, you're doing this, and I'm going to argue, and I see this many times, left, right, religious, non-religious, where people have already built a narrative, and so they're arguing for that narrative. And that actually isn't addressing any of the major things, maybe down the person's soul or their thought process or their circumstances of life that brought them there. And so we're actually doing a disservice. We're wasting both of our times because, one, we're arguing instead of hearing, but by hearing, it actually may challenge some of our preconceived notions. And it may, I love some of the things you talk about, is there's areas of gray sometimes. The extremes of politics. There is, probably people on the right who are Nazis, and people on the left who are, the extreme injecting, There is a few people on those very end of the spectrums. When we take that person and we paint the entire rest of it with the extreme, well, that's really unfair because, again, we're looking for common ground with people.
So here's something I really want to dive into as well, because I think I like what we've touched on. We've talked about starting that initial conversation. I think that's really important. But for the person that's looking for that next step, because what happens is you have that initial conversation. Maybe you make a friend on the other side of the aisle. You've listened. You've done your part. I think a lot of people say, well, what do I do next? Because I think that eventually there is going to be that point where you're going to find contention points and the other person is going to want you to cross over, right? And I understand, or you may want them. You may say, oh, eventually I want them to cross over to my side. So what do we do when we're trying to continue this relationship that's across the aisle?
That's an interesting question, for sure, Zach. I've had, numerous relationships that kind of went in that direction over the years that you're talking about, where, unfortunately, there came to, an impasse. There was a separation in the relationship, but those have been, more limited, particularly in recent years when I've just learned a few more things about myself and about other people, and and some of the more healthy ways to develop relationships. But still, it can happen. But I think if we continue to try to work on cultivating the friendship, cultivating the relationship, and we model some of that for people, again, I don't think people are used to being heard. I don't think they're used to being respected. I don't think they're used to being listened to. I don't think people are used to having questions asked, like non-threatening, like just questions that express genuine interest, care, and concern for another person. And research shows that people are plenty happy to talk about themselves, right? They're ready. They're willing to share. You talked earlier on in this conversation about, these numbers of, in our culture today, spiking numbers of loneliness and isolation and all these different things. Well, people don't feel heard. And I think much of social media is sort of people's attempt to be heard in so many different ways, to be paid attention to. And so when they have a live person sitting with them who is genuinely interested in them, I think that's the way you cultivate a relationship. And you go forward with that same sort of pattern, whether it's repeated interactions, repeated conversations, lunch, coffee, whatever. I think, Zach, my own experience has been that oftentimes paves more of a path for a relationship that can handle the turbulence that may come down the road with things like disagreement. I think we have a greater chance of that happening if we can work at not just the initial conversation, but if God's opening a door for, a more prolonged relationship, that we can have that. I had to circle back around with my Muslim friends, particularly one in particular who was the president of the mosque. I had to sit with him over dinner at one point and ask him some very difficult questions. So it was right after the shooting in Waco, Texas. And it was determined that two of those shooters, I believe there were two of them involved, they were actually from our neighborhood and they had association with that mosque. And so I had to sit with him and ask him some really, what felt like to me, very, very, very hard questions. But our relationship had developed to the point where he could handle those hard questions.
Yeah.
And I could honestly run the risk of asking those hard questions. But again, we're talking about, the time and effort that it takes to cultivate a relationship. And that's way different than just showing up and trying to change someone's mind or prove a point.
And I think, the respect thing is really where that hits on. Zach, what I heard you say was, how do you handle when people, they want you to go do or say or be a part of the things that like you can't go and say and do and be a part of. And if we've built that foundation where they know I respect them, as a person, I may not agree with all their positions or their values or their things, but if they know that I've done my best to respect them. I've also tried, something I've really tried to do over the last few years is identify what is my part. That if I'm sideways about something, is it my own insecurities? Have I reacted in a way that maybe was unkind or uncaring, or dismissive, maybe is the word I'm looking for, or dismissive of them because I dismissed their position? Did I dismiss them? And so then going back and trying to go, okay, hey, when I said or did this, I was wrong. Would you forgive me? And so I think there's two parts here. One, when I begin to respect them, many times, not always, but I think most of the time I've seen that people are willing to respect my no. But then also when I got it wrong, going back and just being willing to admit it. And they may never admit they're wrong to me. There might have been an argument or fight or whatever. Somebody's Thanksgiving dinner and people got livened up and it's like that. Those families can split apart for forever, or someone can do the hard work. I love how Pastor Dan says it. Take the long walk around. Mm-hmm. This golf term. He goes, a good golfer, will squat down and look and be like, hey, which way is the putt going to go? A better golfer will take the long walk around and see where it's going to come to.
Yeah, the other angle.
And if we're willing to do that, the line of, does it make sense? Did what they do or say, or what they believe, does it make sense to them? And when I'm willing to do that, there's probably a good chance that I can build and restore relationships that are broken. As I deal with my own rejection, as I deal with my own insecurities in my life, I think that then it begins to open up that relationship of mutual shared respect. And maybe if people know that they're loved, it might allow those relationships to move forward in spite of those things. But
yeah, and that's what I think you said that really well, Matt. That's what I was trying to emphasize as well. I think the odds are greater. I mean, in the end, Zach and Matt, it's not up to us to control the relationship or the direction of the relationship, right? Yeah. That's just not our responsibility. I believe that God puts me around people for a purpose, and he puts people in my life for a purpose, whether that's for a moment, for a season, or for a very long, extended period of time. My job is just to pay attention to what he may want to be doing in either that moment or that season or that prolonged period of time. And I think in the end, Paul said it this way in 2 Corinthians 5:20, he said, we are therefore Christ's ambassadors. It's as though God is making his appeal through us. We're his representatives. We're his ambassadors. I want to represent him well in the relationship. Now that I do have control over. The way I represent him, the way I show up for him, the love heaven's love that flows in me, the way that leaks out of me and flows through me, the way I listen, the way I treat a person, Matt, that word respect, the way I respect a person, those are things that I can be in control of. I choose to be a representative or an agent or an ambassador of my King, of Jesus. And I can do that. It's interesting when Paul said it's as though he's making his appeal through us. The word appeal in the original language, it's an interesting word. It means several different things. It's got multi dimensions to it, but it includes things like encouragement and comfort. It's not just instruction and teaching, though it is. And so sometimes we show up into a conversation thinking, we've got something to it. We have a word of instruction. We have a word of correction. We have a word of direction. Well, that may be true, but part of that word appeal if we're to be a real representative of his, is to encourage, is to console, it's to comfort, it's to guide and direct. And I think those are the things that we can own that. We can be responsible for those things.
I think one thing also that you just had said to drop in real quick is like, it's not our job to change that person.
Right.
That's if I come into the conversation or the relationship with my job is here to change you, then I'm playing God, and God, that's going to be frustrating pretty quick. And so instead of going in, God, what do you want me to do? And I would say I don't do this as much as I should, but coming in with a posture of, God, what do you want me to do for this person, for this relationship, and praying for them, praying and asking God, show me my own stuff. And if I have that hard attitude, I think it's going to shift. I remember years ago, I was in this relationship with this person that I thought was heading towards marriage, but there was some stuff that was some challenging things. That had to be dealt with. And I remember I was praying for those things to be fixed because I wanted my agenda. And I was fasting for those things to be fixed because I wanted my agenda. And my posture, my attitudes were controlling, kind of rejecting, and very overly persuasive, cause and effect. Well, if this doesn't happen, this, it's like, and I'm not saying I got all of that wrong, but in hindsight, I think there was probably a good portion of it, of my flesh tied up in it, that was trying to control the situation and the person.
Sure.
Not that the end result wasn't a good end result.
Right.
But I wasn't trusting God in the midst of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think something I really liked, you guys were both touching on this a lot. And it's, what is the purpose behind the conversation I'm having with this person, or the relationship that I have with this person? I think a lot of us as Christians, we are people filled with purpose. And so we like to also plan our own purposes in our conversations and in our relationships that we maybe give God the credit for that he didn't even give us. But one thing I was thinking about, so I went through a stint where I've done a lot of acting in the past. I've done musical theater and some short films, things like that. So I've taken acting classes in college and things like that. And one of the things they teach you that when you're acting in a film or a play or whatever is that as an actor, you're listening so that you know how to respond with your next line. So you're constantly taught, you got to listen to the person's line as they're saying it. You got to listen for ways that you can make your line bounce off of theirs or whatever. And I think that a lot of us have our relationships and listen with the same purpose that those actors do. Is we are having a conversation with someone or in a relationship with someone for the purpose of responding to them or for the purpose of changing their mind.
Yeah.
And so we only listen with that in mind.
We have an agenda.
Right. We have an agenda behind it. And while maybe we might have a good intention behind it, it might be, my intention is to lead them to Christ. But I think what we need to practice, and you guys touched on this so beautifully, is when we're listening because we want to know about them. We're listening because their relationship is what's important in the moment, not how we can change them and not how we can respond to them. Because if our response is the most important thing in the moment, we're not gonna hear half the things they say.
That's right. Yeah,
I
think that's a great point, Matt. I was just going to say, the discipline I'm wanting to develop in my own life is to listen to learn rather than listen to respond. I think that's what you're suggesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a term that I love. It's called multi-level marketing Christianity. All of us have had the friend on Facebook that suddenly reaches back out over years. Hey, how you doing? I'd love to grab coffee or something. And then you're like, hey, this is great. I haven't seen him in a long time. I always had great conversation with him or whatever. And then you get to there trying to sell you a house, trying to sell you, join the whatever. And it's suddenly, it feels so icky because you go, man, I thought someone cared. And then you found out they had an agenda, and it wasn't that they cared. their agenda was their agenda on how I could be a part of their thing.
By the way, Matt, I've been meaning to get with you and talk to you about this incredible opportunity that just came my way.
I'm looking forward to that. But I think one thing that also I just want to interject to you, Bob. I would say, my ADHD type of attitude is I'm always on to the next thing.
Right.
And I find that you do an excellent job of putting the agenda aside, the things that are your schedule, your itinerary for the person that's in front of you. I saw that when you and I were in Alaska, and I'm trying to find a shirt because my shirt had gotten all dirty from us filming up on the mountain all day, and I had to film some things trying to find a shirt. And we walk in this place, and you started this conversation with this gal at this fish processing and sales place. They had some knickknacks and things there. And you got to, it's like you just hit pause on the day's agenda. We had a lot of things to do, but you hit pause and you got to pray with her. She wept. You got to hear her concerns and things she was struggling with. Tell me, how did you get to that? What is your process for doing that? Because there's many times if we hit pause for every moment,
right,
we'll never get things done. When we're not respecting other people's time in the process. So tell me, how do you find a balance in that?
Yeah, I mean, I first of all, I don't do it perfectly for sure. I mean, I'm still trying to learn these things as I go. But for me, what I try to just do is have this discipline of that mindset and that perspective that, my life in so many ways is not my own. And each day is planned by him. He reminds me that when he brings the sun up, which is something I cannot do, right? It's his day. He's bringing the sun up. He brought it up today in all of its splendor and glory and beauty and creativity. That's just amazing. And then he brings me up out of bed, which is equally as miraculous, right? Particularly at my age and my broken down body. But he brings me up out of bed. Why? To join him on his day. So he's got the whole day sort of laid out. And he's like, son, come with me. Like, we're going to go on this grand adventure today. Now, that could just be the entrepreneurial side of who I am, because I have an entrepreneur spirit. I'm a pastor trapped in an entrepreneur's body, So the excitement and the energy of new things and new ideas and that kind of stuff is just very much the way that I'm wired. But I try to have that mindset throughout the day that is, if something is unfolding around me, as you mentioned in that case in Alaska, Matt, that's not something I'm planning. It's just something that I want to observe. It's something I want to pay attention to. I like to say, our discipline should be to live awake, to live attentive, just paying attention. Jesus said, my Father is always at work. You think about that. Always at work. Sometimes we pray this prayer, well, God, we just pray that you show up. Well, I understand, I think, what people are trying to say or what they mean when they say that. But if you think about it, he's already present and on scene. Yeah. He's already moving. He's already at work in every situation. So if he chooses to invite me into that situation by allowing me to be present, then my responsibility is just to be awake to that and to follow his lead and guide in it. And I will tell you that in nearly every case that I can think of, Matt, where that happens to me, on very consistent basis, more often than not, there is another human being. There is a person involved in that moment, because God is always about the person, right? He leaves the 99 to go find the one. He's always about the individual in that person. And nobody knows more fully that person than him. And then he brings me, maybe, or you, into that moment and gives us what we need to be able to, move into that moment with him and allow his redemptive work maybe to be done in that moment. I just know of no higher calling or purpose, no more exciting thing that we could give our lives to. That's way better to me than giving my life to a list of tasks. And not that the tasks aren't important, but I don't know if that answered your question, Zach. I think maybe I got off.
No, I mean, I think that's good, because it all ties this together. And it's all about, God is about the one. just as much as he's about the many.
Yeah.
And it's really easy for us to compartmentalize, to say, well, the many is, but we need to focus on those relationships that we have with the one. It doesn't matter if we disagree with them. And I love where this conversation's gone, because it's something that I deeply care about. I have many friends with different belief systems than me, and navigating those relationships can be very hard sometimes. But it's so rewarding when you get that relationship to a point where you're able to have the tough conversations. And we don't always agree. This whole podcast idea came from me talking with a friend of mine who's a pastor. Wonderful guy. He and I disagree on pretty much many levels, almost every level on politics, right? But what's really fun is we get together and we'll talk about, and we'll just listen to each other. I'll say, well, this is why. And he'll ask a question. I'll be like, okay, well, but I saw this news story. Like, does that not upset you? And I say, oh yeah, it upsets me. But then we find out he and I are both upset about the exact same problems.
Right. Mm-hmm.
He and I both care for the person who is disadvantaged, or for the person who is getting taken advantage of, or we both care about the same issues. Mm-hmm. We may disagree with how those issues are solved, but he and I care about the same issues. Yeah. We both care that Jesus makes his way through the country and radically changes lives. And so he and I will partner on all kinds of things, because at the end of the day, God's going to sort out the politics. He's given us the Holy Spirit. When we get to the point where we're disagreeing, he and I both have the Holy Spirit. And if we pray and ask God for wisdom, he gives it to us. It's something that we've kind of gotten to. And so really, and wrapping all of this up, he and I end every conversation that we have like that with, love you, man.
That's great.
Love you, man. And then next thing you know, after we had this heated conversation, or, I used the word heated, but it was more, passionate, yeah. Right? We had this passionate conversation, and we end it and we love you, man, hug it out or whatever. And then next thing you know, we're talking about, oh, have you heard this podcast from, whoever? Oh, did you hear? Like, oh, it's so good. I saw that movie last week. And it's like that every time. And so those relationships can exist, and we can lovingly disagree.
Yeah.
And I think you made a really great point, Zach, is you use tools in the midst of those conversations. And those tools, whether we're in a marriage, whether we're in a friendship, whether we're engaging with a person we just met that may have a very different background than us, those tools of what I heard you say was, you're not assuming, you're not going, well, this is what you said. No, wait a minute, what? Because you're the one that wrote the words that you spilled out onto your friend, right? Right. And if he just automatically goes, so you believe this, you believe that, and it's like, no, what? So what I heard you say was this, this, and this, and that's why you believe this? Is that correct? And it gives you the chance to either one, I know I don't always say the things I want to say the correct way. It gives you a chance, or whoever the speaker is, a chance to go, oh, no, sorry, you're misunderstood. Either you misunderstood or I miscommunicated. No, my point is this, or here's my belief about this, or here's my thing. Oh, okay. So then what you're saying is this, this, and this. Yes. Okay. And if we do that, if we're making sure we're actually hearing each other instead of the jumping to conclusions, I just wonder, and I know from my life a few times, how much quicker that's going to help bring the temperature down in some of those conversations, because we're not ready to jump in with our point. It's forcing me to hear with listening ears, not hear to react and respond with my point or my agenda.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing you say with that too, Matt, is that, we can all probably gain some help by, learning how to have good conversations. Yeah. And I think just culturally we've lost that art, the art of being able to have the skill set to have really good or meaningful conversations, which includes the ability to be able to navigate disagreement or conflict. It's just, it's hard to find people that know how to really sit and navigate a two-way conversation. And and we could probably do well. I mean, I've given myself the last year or so, I'm trying to read more and more. I read a great book recently by David Brooks called How to Get to Know a Person. And man, I mean, it just increased some of the tools in my toolbox, to be able to have good conversations with people, just fun conversations too, not always, the more intense or in depth, but just like, sitting across from someone, over a lunch or a cup of coffee and having a conversation.
I think your point is having a fun conversation. Like, because why do we not let it be fun? Because we feel like the stakes are too high.
Yeah.
It's my culture or my school or my church or my, so many times the stakes are too high to engage at a lesser level. It can feel like
the stakes are too high if we go into the conversation with a point to prove.
Yep.
Yeah. There's so I watch, I don't know if you ever heard, there's these two, this pastor and his son out of Connecticut. His name's Cliff Connectley and his son is Stuart Connectley. And they've kind of blown up on TikTok and Instagram or whatever. And what they do is they drive around different college campuses and they sit down and they basically have a sign or whatever. And they say, college students can ask us any question, talk to us about anything, talk to us about Jesus. And they just have the conversation. And that's it. You guys can ask them a question, they can have the conversation, figure out why they believe what they believe. But what's crazy is those little short videos and clips of them talking to these students and things like that have just blown up. And they've actually gotten to go on some of these crazy, huge podcasts that are done by very secular people who would never have a Christian pastor on their podcast. And what's cool is I was listening to one of those podcasts. And that person in the podcast said, I know who you are, to this pastor, the guy interviewing him who's secular. He's talking to this pastor and he says, I know who you are. And I know that you care about me. I know that you care about these people. And he said, because he was struggling with certain Christian doctrine. I just can't believe that you would do this because I know that you care about people. And then that gave him the opportunity to say, I do believe this because I care about people, and here's why. What I think is cool about Cliff and Stuart Connectley, and feel free to look them up if you want to, I think they do a great job with this stuff, is that they open up the conversation and they just talk to people. And when they come out of it, people know that they are loved and cared for by these people. And they come out of it knowing that Jesus loves and cares for them because these two pastors are being Christ ambassadors. And I think how much more powerful would it be if we had these kinds of conversations with people? I'm not saying we have to go to college campuses, and I think most people are not qualified to do that because it's hard. It's tough. You got to know your stuff. But I think that having those conversations where we just say, let's talk about whatever. Talk to me about Jesus. Man, how much more powerful can that be?
Yeah, kind of a little bit of a nuance to that, Zach. I love that story, but I also my wife was sharing with me something that she had seen online where there's an elderly lady. She's like my age, and she goes to she may be doing this at ASU. I can't remember, but she goes onto a university campus and she sits on a bench, and there's this huge banner behind her that introduces herself. Hi, I'm Grandma so-and-so, Grandma Nellie or whatever, and I'm here today to listen to you.
Wow.
And she sits on this bench. And this video shows student after student after student. I think there's one shot where they're like standing in line to sit with this grandma. Think about this. To be listened to.
Yeah.
I mean, it may be one of the greatest evangelistic tools of the church's day today to develop the fine art of listening. There could be a reason where James said, you ought to be slow to speak and quick to listen, and just things like that. I think that, we can all sit back, me certainly included, to say, I just really, God, with your help, will you help me develop the art of listening or these other things we've talked about today, will you help me develop those things just like today? Help me to pay attention and really lean into those things and see how God might move and how he might work. And I have a feeling that internally we'll probably feel better about ourselves. We'll probably feel more at peace and rest inside, because when you're tussling with somebody else, you're usually tussling with yourself. You know what I mean? That external tension tends to land internally too. At least that's been my story. And so my own soul or my, own insides can get knotted up and get, tense and anxious. And so I can live a life of, peace when I'm at peace with others too.
Yeah.
I think it's the thing that I've really tried to, in some of my communications, I would say, is the thing I'm trying to add more and more in the back of my mind is, in this conversation, the goal isn't to be right. The goal is shared understanding. And if I have shared understanding with someone, what could that create? What could that open up?
Yeah.
Where could those conversations, those relationships go if I don't come in saying my goal in understanding, like even this thing, back and forth, like I was talking about, hey, so what I heard you say is what I had, if even that tool can be used in a controlling, a manipulative way. I had a friend who they had gone through that, some communication training, and I would hear them as they're fighting, with him and his wife, they would go back and it's like, well, I heard you say this and I heard you say that. And what, just like, and they were using as weapons. And it's like, man, if we're taking any of these tools with using it as a weapon, I don't think that's what glorifies God. I just go, Christ, how can I be your light to this person instead of coming here to be right?
Yeah. Yeah, the tool of listening. Yeah, I think we could totally use that in our marriages too.
Yeah.
Like, not just in meeting new people in our current friendships, but our marriages and family relationships. I think thank you guys so much for just coming in here and talking about it. I know it's a tough subject, and I just appreciate you guys taking the time to come talk about it. And I want to challenge really everyone that's listening in on this podcast. Have those conversations, have this, do this scary thing, reach out, not with the intention of changing someone's mind, but with the intention of listening. And obviously I say, do it, pray, ask the Holy Spirit for guidance, stay in God's word. Let me make sure you're grounded in God's truth as well. But yeah, so thank you guys so much for being with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for the invite, Zach. It's been a fun conversation. I've learned some things this morning and been reminded of some things. So thank you guys for, the great conversation.